Before anything else, you need to know one thing. If you ever find yourself beneath a sky that moves like a living bruise, if you ever hear whispers leaking from the metal of your own home, if you ever see grain shimmering with colors your eyes were never meant to perceive, run, because that means your world is already lost, claimed by something far older and crueler than human fear. And if you do not run, you will learn the truth I learned, that life under chaos is not life at all, but a slow unraveling of everything that made you human. But before we descend into that darkness, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Now imagine that place cracking, open under the weight of the warp. Picture your home street bending, reality folding, and the sky bleeding in ways you can barely comprehend. That was my world. A place that once produced food for distant planets, now producing screams, prayers, and things far worse. It started subtly, lights flickering, stars in the wrong positions, the wind carrying whispers like someone calling your name from behind a closed door. No alarms, no warning sirens, just the slow horror of something, entering our reality like rot, creeping through a wound. And when the first cult symbols appeared burned into the old silo walls, we told ourselves vandals did it, because humans always choose denial over terror, at least in the beginning. But the warp doesn't wait for belief, it feasts on it. The day the sky split was the day we stopped pretending. I was in the fields, loading nutrient sacks onto a shuttle crawler, when light, if you can call it light, ripped downwards, like a blade slicing open heaven itself. It wasn't bright, it wasn't warm. It was an impossible spectrum of colors twisting, pulsing, deepening into a wound that somehow bled sound. People stopped working and screamed, not because of what they saw, but because of what they felt. The air grew heavy, ionized, pressing against us like a giant invisible hand. My ears rang until I tasted copper. Some workers dropped to their knees, clutching their skulls, babbling nonsense syllables that didn't belong in our language. Others laughed. A few began crying for their mothers, even grown men, and then came the voices, clear, distinct, echoing across the fields, yet spoken by no mouth, promises, temptations, warnings. I heard my dead grandmother whisper my name. I heard myself answer before I realized I was speaking. Then the breach widened, tearing through the atmosphere like a splitting bone, and through it marched shapes of iron and horn and nightmare, traitor marines, heretic astartes. They walked without hurry, as if the world already belonged to them, and in truth it did. The invasion wasn't war. War implies two sides. This was overwhelming possession. Townships collapsed within hours. The planetary defense forces fired for maybe 10 minutes before their bunkers were opened, like tin cans in their bodies, pinned to walls in patterns the cultists called constellations. Chaos doesn't conquer by brute force alone. It breaks reality, bends it, then forces you to accept the bend as normal. The first weeks were chaos in the truest, most literal sense. Rivers flowed backward. Shadows moved even when nothing cast them. A child in the settlement next to ours spoke with two voices at once and burst into flames that danced instead of burned. Some people fled into the forests, some into caves. None returned. And slowly, inevitably, a hierarchy formed, not of governance but survival. The Dark Apostle spoke daily through Vox Towers, his sermons threading nightmares directly into our bloodstream. The weak obeyed because they feared death. The strong obeyed because chaos promised them a life where fear could be weaponized. And the rest of us obeyed because the alternative was worse. When the Dark Apostle praised his newly awakened flock, we stood silently and stared at the ground, pretending not to hear the gargled cries of those being awakened behind him. The sky never stopped shifting. Neither did we. My mother died during what we called the harvest stillness. The name sounds almost peaceful, but it was the most terrifying hour of my life. The Vox Towers cut out mid-sermon, and sudden natural silence engulfed the town. No chants, no metallic groans from the haunted fabrication stacks, no distant screams, just quiet. My mother's eyes widened with a terror I had never seen before. She grabbed my wrist so tightly her nails broke my skin. "Do not move," she whispered. "Movement draws them." Then we crawled under a collapsed grain shed and waited. The silence stretched until my heartbeat felt louder than my breathing. Then came the tremors, rhythmic, heavy, metallic. Chaos Space Marines. Their footfalls were unmistakable. The walk of armored giants who felt no need for haste, because nothing on this world could oppose them. Through a crack in the debris, I saw their armor, jagged, carved, stained with layers of ancient gore. Cultists scampered around them like rats scurrying around wolves. Someone nearby broke. A man, maybe a farmer, maybe a laborer, bolted from hiding and sprinted toward the fields. A Marine didn't even turn his head. He simply stretched out a gauntlet and the man exploded into a red mist. My mother's grip tightened. When the patrol finally passed, I whispered, "We're safe." But she didn't answer. She never would again. After her burial, if you can call covering a body, with dirt before scavengers find it a burial, I changed. Everyone did. Fear became oxygen. Obedience became instinct. And the strangest thing happened. Routine returned. Horrifying routine, but routine nonetheless. We mapped out safe zones, although nothing was truly safe. We learned the schedule of cult processions and avoided them. We memorized which days the air shimmered with warp sickness and stayed indoors. We avoided mirrors after dark. We ignored whispers coming from drains. We didn't question why certain people woke up with new voices or wounds shaped like runes. The fields kept producing. The machines kept grinding. We kept living because dying meant being noticed. And chaos did not grant clean deaths. Sometimes when working the grain pits, I looked up at the rafters and saw shapes that slithered along the beams. Sometimes shadows. Sometimes pale limbs. Sometimes the suggestion of things with too many joints. But I kept my head bowed. The overseers encouraged that. Acknowledgement was dangerous. Recognition was an invitation. And chaos always accepted invitations. There were strange moments when normality tried to crawl back in. A child laughing. A man humming. A woman lighting a tiny candle in memory of a husband long gone. But those moments were fragile. They shattered easily. Once, when a little girl sang a soft tune her grandmother taught her, half the shift cried. Not because the song was sad, but because it reminded us of a world that no longer existed. Another time, a storm rolled in without warp distortion. Real thunder. Real lightning. People ran outside, arms raised, thanking the Emperor for a natural sky. Then the thunder turned into screaming faces carved into the clouds, and the rain fell as acidic droplets that left burns on exposed skin. Survivors learned a hard lesson. Hope was a weapon chaos used against us, and yet even knowing that, hope lingered like a wound that refused to heal. Some whispered that the Imperium would return. Others swore they had seen signs, a distant contrail, a shard of silver light in the smog. I didn't believe any of it. Not until the night everything changed. It happened during a late shift, while I loaded grain sacks into a hauler bound for the northern citadel. I felt it before I saw it, a subtle shift, a quietness that wasn't the lethal, stillness but something gentler, natural, normal. The machines hummed steadily. The overseer wasn't chanting. The air felt clean, comfortable. Even the darkness seemed ordinary. Then breaking through the night sky came a streak of fire, thin, sharp, deliberate. A drop pod, then another. My throat tightened, but not in joy. Anyone who has lived on a chaos world knows the truth. Imperial liberation rarely means survival. Purity tests, mass sterilization, exterminatus if deemed necessary. To the Imperium, a tainted world is a liability, a poisoned limb to be cut off for the greater body. So when I saw those drop pod trails, I didn't feel saved. I felt doomed. Because salvation, in the grim darkness of the far future, often burns as hot as damnation. Still, I ran toward the ridge overlooking the plains. I don't know why. Perhaps because I needed to see if hope was real or another trick of the warp. Flames streaked downward, smashing into the corrupted farmland with bone-shaking force. The ground rippled, reality itself quivering. Sirens, heretic sirens, began to wail across the settlements. Cultists scrambled like insects. Demons flickered in and out of existence, snarling in frustration. Chaos Marines turned their horned helmets toward the impact zones. The Dark Apostle's booming voice flooded the Vox Towers, ordering all awakened servants to gather, defend, bleed for their gods. But for the first time in years, the Chaos Warriors moved with urgency. They sensed threat, real threat, and that meant the Imperium truly had returned. I watched in paralyzed fascination as the first Imperial forces broke through the smoke, towering figures clad in ceramite, their armor shining like truth carved into steel. Loyalist astartes, Space Marines. They moved with purpose, discipline, and righteous fury, and for a heartbeat I almost believed we were saved. Until reality reminded me, the arrival of angels does not guarantee mercy. War erupted instantly. Not battle, war. Furious, explosive, deafening war. Bolter fire hammered the plains, tearing apart cultist packs like sacks of meat. Chain's words screamed in ritual counterpoint to the howls of demons. The sky burned red and gold as orbital bombardments lit distant hills. Chaos Marines met Loyalists in brutal collisions that shook the earth. I watched one combatant, massive, horned, wielding a chain axe half its size, roar in defiance as a Loyalist drove a power sword through its corrupted chest. Another traitor unleashed a warp-fueled shockwave that twisted 3 guardsmen into geometric shapes no human body should ever form. Bodies exploded. Ground blackened. Air thickened with ash and ozone. And through it all I felt something building in my chest. Not hope, not fear. Something colder. The realization that no matter which side won, our world would not survive the aftermath. Either chaos would consume us completely, or the Imperium would purge us for our contamination. Liberation meant judgment, and judgment meant death. Smoke blanketed the horizon. Refugees, those not sworn to chaos, ran from settlements, now overrun with crossfire. I joined them, sprinting across fields that still shimmered faintly with warp residue. A woman carrying her son tripped near me, and I lifted her up by instinct. A man missing an arm begged for direction but collapsed before I could answer. People stumbled blindly, following anyone who seemed less terrified than they were. The land itself fought us, cracking open, pulsing, reshaping. One patch of soil liquefied, swallowing half a dozen fleeing workers. A farmhouse folded inward like paper, and above us dropships descended carrying more Imperial forces. Some fired warning shots to drive us back. Others ignored us entirely, focused solely on the chaos strongholds. We were background noise, collateral, contamination. I realized then that the Imperium might not even consider us civilians, only liabilities to be processed. And when the first purification teams landed, clad in sealed armor and carrying purity flamers, I knew we had exchanged one nightmare for another. Yet something in me refused to give in. Maybe because I had survived too much to die quietly. Maybe because I wanted my mother's death to mean something. Or maybe because I wasn't ready to let either side decide my fate. As the battle raged and the plains burned, I made myself a promise. I would live long enough to tell this story, to warn others, to ensure that someone somewhere understood what life under chaos truly meant, not myth, not rumor, but lived reality. And so I kept running. Kept hiding, kept surviving, even as the world tore itself apart behind me, even as the sky cracked a second time, releasing new horrors, or new salvation depending on your faith. And now as I speak these final words, know this: if the Imperium ever arrives on your corrupted world, prepare for salvation that feels like fire. And if chaos arrives first, prepare for life itself to become the battlefield. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share.